Cool. Well, welcome back from lunch. Before we start anything, it's a lot of effort to put on a conference like this. It's a lot of effort and work to give a talk. I think it's worth one more round of applause for not only UX and Access as well as the speakers, though, for putting this on today. It's pretty great. So 50% or more of your time at work is actually spent selling to others. And think about what that means. Think about what your day-to-day looks like when you're not actually doing the research or conducting analysis, or some of you in the audience designing. What's that time spent doing? I argue that at least half, maybe more, is actually spent selling to other people. So, this is me. I bring this up because, yes, it's funny, you're allowed to laugh, you're not going to offend me, but I stole a line from a guy, I think it was one of the co-founders of Unbounce. Anybody ever heard of that company? Yeah, so when he gives talks, I heard him on a podcast say he likes to be nutritious and delicious. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to do today with the talk, is yes, be delicious by the way of entertaining and fun. You took time out of your Saturday, which is a pretty beautiful day out in New York City. There's a ton of great stuff to do, to be here and listen to us, namely me, because you haven't left yet. But also be nutritious, right? So hopefully take something away today that you can apply to your work and actually help you do that a little bit better. Talk a little bit about my background, not because I like to, in fact, just the opposite, but just to give you a little perspective of where I'm coming from with some of the things that I'll talk about today. So I'm co-founder of a company called REcon. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a user research and insights tool for folks like us. We had a podcast and stuff like that in the past. I'm also president of UXPA Minnesota, which is where I'm from, so I came in here to visit all of you today. And then have been involved in other communities such as Research Ops. We have stickers going around, Holly's in the back, and Michelle. Talk to them if you want to get involved in that. But I talk about my background because it's an interesting story. So I used to work at a place called The Nerdery. I'm curious if anybody's ever heard of it. Yeah, okay, cool. So I was one of the original principal UX designers they had there. It was a number of years ago, but what happened was I got involved in a lot of sales conversations. Yeah, so it's a consultancy, right? You have clients that come in, you kind of pitch them work, and then you land and do that work. And I got involved in a lot of the sales conversations. And I didn't always really know why until a year or two after, where some former colleagues of mine told me that the word went around that anytime really hairy strategic or research work came through, they said, you got to get Zack on the sales call. You got to get him in front of that. And I honestly, I was kind of offended by it. Because I'm like, I'm not a salesperson. Like, I'm a designer, I'm a researcher, I'm a product strategy person. I almost took offense to it, like, what? I'm not good at the work, I'm good at selling it. But that wasn't true. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today, because I argue that actually all of you do this and are good at this. And I want to share some tools with you on how that happens. Anybody have any idea what this is? You're fired. Thank you for letting me know it was a dog. It is a dog. It's actually a sheepdog, okay? You're probably all familiar, or at least heard the term sheepdog, right? So sheepdog's job is to wrangle and understand the sheep, but just as importantly, understand the mentality of the wolf. So they play a dual role, right? The sheep trust the sheepdog because they grew up with them. It kind of speaks their language, so to speak, right? And not harmful, not threatening. Wolf, on the other hand, not. But the sheepdog's job is to understand both, has to sort of stand firmly in the middle to understand both to serve the population of sheep. Does that make sense? It's a useful metaphor to keep in mind as we're talking about some of the things we're doing, because that's exactly what selling is in some ways, especially when the work that we do. So let's talk about what I'll chat about today. We're going to actually talk about setting our ideas up for success, in many cases before you ever even have the idea. It's not magic, and I will talk to you exactly about how I've done that. We are going to talk specifically about learning and speaking the business of language, so kind of like that sheepdog metaphor, right? Whoops. We are going to have 5 relevant stories about selling your ideas, some personal, some not. We're also going to have 2 Harrison Ford references, 2 Star Wars references, and a partridge in a pear tree. Okay, so far, it seems like you're on board. So, before we dive in, there's one thing I want to say. We're talking about selling your ideas. We're talking about turning research into action. Couple things to note. I am not going to share anything here that is Jedi mind trick. You're not going to sell anything to anyone that doesn't already have some need or some value for it, right? You're not going to sell water to a fish. Does that make sense? So just understand that this isn't like a magic bullet. I'm not proposing that there's any of that here. The other thing that I want to mention to you is that some of this can be used, we talk a lot about ethics in research. This can be used for nefarious purposes. So consider why you might want to do this. Consider why you might be interested in learning how to sell your ideas. It's worth introspection. Does that make sense? I got at least one nod, so I'll go with that. Okay, so we used to run a podcast at Aurelius, and Jim Callback, who actually was keynote here last year, was on there. One of the things he came on the show and chatted us about was this concept, and he says he'd encourage more people to get out and learn other areas of the business, marketing, sales, business, whatever that might be. Because what happens, and just think about yourself, have you ever presented your work or your ideas, your recommendations, or why design and research is important, and somebody not listened to you? And you threw your hands up and said, well, they just don't get it. They're idiots. They don't get design. They don't value design. Well, he argues, and I agree with him, instead of just complaining they don't get it, understand why they don't get it. Understand why they do what they do in business. This is going to be a central theme in the talk here. And to kick us off, I need 2 volunteers. I've got 1, 2, perfect. Whew, you didn't even know what you're getting in for. Come on up here, please. All right. Come on up here. What's your name?
John.
John. Thanks for doing this. Matthew. Okay, cool. Can everybody hear this? All right, what we're going to do is a game called Tappers and Listeners. Has anybody ever heard it before? Good. All right, so what I want to do, otherwise this whole talk is ruined. What I want you to do, John, is I want you to tap a song. Matthew, I want you to listen to it and try to guess what song it is. I have one rule. It cannot be Happy Birthday. Okay? So please tap away. Matthew, do your best to guess the song. Anytime you're ready.
I don't think we listened to the same music.
Any ideas, Matthew?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's completely okay. There's no right or wrong answers here. Your turn.
Okay.
Tap a song for John. John, please try to guess. Only rule is it cannot be Happy Birthday to You. That's the only rule.
It keeps going like that.
Any ideas, John? Okay, not a problem. Round of applause for these two for doing this, please. Thanks a lot. All right. No, neither of them guessed it. For what it's worth, take some solace in the fact that that happens every time I give this talk. And I do this exercise for a reason, because when we're talking about selling ideas, you couldn't guess each other's song. Why do you think that is, Matthew?
I don't know. He told me what his song was, and it's totally one I know.
Sure. You knew the song, you heard the sounds, but still couldn't quite guess it. Probably the same thing for you, John?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I suck at music.
Well, we don't need that on the recording. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So they heard it, and Matthew even said it's a song that I know. So what happened? They're lacking context. They don't understand the language each other's speaking. You had it perfectly clear in your head. But the other person didn't. And that's what happens when we're trying to sell our ideas and people don't get it. 99% of the time, right? People are still people, and sometimes they just don't care about your ideas, and I can't help you solve that, but I can help you solve the communication gap, right? And that is something we can overcome. This is relevant story number 1. It is also Star Wars reference number 1 in slide alone. So at the time I was at the Nerdery, this was actually very early on when I joined there, we got a huge project in. Now this company was over 30 years old in the lease management space, okay? They came to us, they had an application that they had like majority market share for this entire time, right? But the application was run via green screen with keyboard input only. You know what I'm talking about? Like the terminal. I see some eyebrows raised. Yes, it was that scary. It was literally like typing stuff in. It was in a green screen type interface on a PIC database. Anybody even know what a PIC database is? Show of hands. Nice. So you know this is extremely old technology. Well, you both work in legacy and even financial spaces. There's a reason that they still stay on that, but that's not what this talk is about. Anyway, they came to us and said, we want you to redesign this to be a web UI in a relational database. So for those of you who understand what a PIC database is, for those of you who understand the input in the terminal, about as far as point from A to B as you can get, right? And of course, there's a ton of research that needed to go into that. And this was the single biggest research project the company, the Nerdery, had at that time. Now, I'd been there for maybe a couple months, and then I was assigned to lead it. So far, it was going pretty good. We had a very good plan until I got an email that the CTO of the company requested my presence and my coworker downtown in his office to discuss the project. So, after I unclenched, we went downtown and met with this person, and he said, listen, guys, I like what you've proposed, and I like how the project's going so far, but I just do not see anywhere where I'm going to get my templates. We didn't have templates anywhere on the scope of work or on the project plan. So we talked with him, and through the process of this conversation, came to realize he was calling templates our prototype and our insights that inform the prototype. We weren't speaking his language. We were delivering him exactly what he wanted, actually more than he expected, but we weren't speaking his language. So you work in sales. Whether or not you accept that is entirely up to you, but that's what I'm going to talk about. You work in sales, and I firmly believe that. If that's going to be the case, and you're going to take this ride with me today, the question should become, what makes a good salesperson, right? If we agree, yeah, we actually do this work, how can we get better at it? That's partly why you're here today. If you do a simple Google search for salesperson, you're going to find some images like this. I heard, so shock and awe campaign happening on the stage. But this is the kind of stereotype that you get when you say the salesperson, right? This is exactly what you think of. Even Google tells you, and they're always right? So, but this isn't what it is. What makes a good salesperson is the thing that you're very good at already today, which is why you're here, and that's empathy. The ability to understand people and be able to relate to their perspective. The thing is, and this is a quote from Christina Woodkey, also from our podcast, when we had a chat with her, a lot of people out there have empathy for their users, but not actually for the people they work with and for. Rachel talked about this in her keynote this morning, right? Piggyback on some of her ideas. This is a big deal. We spend so much time trying to figure out and learn and understand the people we're designing for, but we don't spend a lot of time watering the garden of people we work. So basically, sales isn't what you think it is. And selling your ideas or your recommendations is essentially figuring out the right things to make, making a very clear case for why they're the right things, both for customers and the business, and then clearly sharing those recommendations. Does this make sense? Most importantly, it's about building trust and confidence. I need one more volunteer. You're able to stay in your seat. Oh, your hand went up fast. You're definitely going. Okay, so what's your name? Melissa. If I told you I can get you home from the conference today faster and easier than the way you got here, if I told you that right now, would you believe me?
No.
No. So our answer is no.
No.
Right. The answer is no. Not a rhetorical question. Why?
Because you're not from New York City and I don't trust you.
And that's the talk, everybody. Have a good day. Right. So, okay, here's the thing. You don't trust me. And this is why this is not a rhetorical question. You don't trust me because I didn't ask you where you live, how you got here, how long it took. I don't even know if you're leaving to go home from here. You might be going somewhere else, right? So this is the idea in selling our ideas. The idea in selling our ideas. If people don't trust us, they don't have confidence that we can give them recommendations that are good for them, in your case, that are actually beneficial to you, why in the world should you listen to me? You are right to do so. Your parents raised you well. Jim Callback had another quote. Again, talk about having empathy for your users. Why don't you have any empathy for your business, the people, and other roles in your business, understanding them? We're all here. We're all part of a team, right? We're all sitting on the same bench. Our job is actually to sell our ideas to, our decisions, recommendations, our ideas to those people, our stakeholders, on behalf of our customers. That's what we do. We're trying to understand them so that we can talk to the people in the business to help them execute and bring those two things together, right? The reality of it is we're actually the liaison then between those two people. So in this picture, we're the elephant. We have on one side the business and the other the users or our customers, right? And we're trying to parlay, so to speak, the needs of one group to another so that everybody can benefit. Question becomes, then how do you actually develop empathy for our stakeholders to turn research into action so that they'll take recommendations? That's a useful question to ask. But before we do, I want to share a story. So this is relevant story number 2. This one's also personal. So I joined a team that looked a lot like Sad Keanu. And the reason was, they had a mobile app, and this is one of many digital properties they had at this business, and it was a broken experience. There was a lot of really bad reviews. It was buggy. People complained about stuff. The team was frustrated. There was an ad hoc process. A lot of the decisions that were being made about design and the actual product itself were sort of guesses and opinion-based. Anybody ever experienced that before? All of us, right? A lot of this bred a lack of trust in design and research, right? Because nothing they were doing was working anyway. So why take somebody's recommendation? So it was so bad that one of the first meetings I had included the director of mobile app and the VP of digital marketing. And I was working with the designer of the mobile app. And the VP of marketing at one point in the meeting took a piece of paper, drew out what he wanted, and handed it back to the designer and said, "That's what I want." How do you think that made the designer feel? Not exactly like a ray of sunshine. So that was one meeting. Literally the next meeting, we came back and provided a number of recommendations, some pretty pivotal in the mobile app. Very different than what we were doing today at the time for that. And there was not a single point of contention. There was only conversation about how we would execute on those ideas. So we went from Sad Keanu to John Wick. So what happened, right? Everybody walked away smiling. What was the difference between those two meetings? I'll tell you exactly what it was. Creating very clear goals for the product and the experience so that we create and start building a shared language between us. Star Wars reference number 2. Well, we need the sound on this. Can we make sure to get that? And by the way, anybody not seen Star Wars? The door's right over there. I'm kidding, of course. But maybe spoiler alert, but you had 40 years to see this. Do we get the sound now, you think? Cool.
She's rich. Rich?
Rich, powerful. Listen, if you would rescue her, the reward would be,
What?
well, more wealth than you can imagine.
I don't know. I can imagine quite a bit.
You'll get it.
I better.
You will.
Okay, so what just happened in that scene? A lot of you, it sounds like you've seen Star Wars. Luke, they're trying to rescue the princess. For those of you, for the one person in the back who didn't see it, they're trying to rescue the princess. Now, Luke is sort of driven and motivated to do the right thing, right? So in many cases, kind of reflecting what we do. We're trying to do right by the user. Han doesn't care about the princess. He doesn't even know who she is yet. But what did Luke do there that helped convince him that he should get on board and actually help? He catered to what's important to him. In this case, at the point in the movie, Han didn't exactly grow his heart of gold yet. He was only interested in gold, and so that's what he did. He catered to that. Genuinely talk with and listen to your stakeholders. You might call this a stakeholder interview. I'm sure a lot of you have done these things in the past. But really what we're talking about here is understanding them to understand what's important to them. Because excellent goals will provide a definition for what a good design, product, feature recommendation is later. It gives us common ground to speak about the same thing. And in fact, it should convey what we're trying to do by explaining the expected benefit or outcome our company can get, as well as for our company or our customers. Here's what I did in between those two meetings in the story that I shared. We set up goals exactly in this way, and I had stakeholder conversations to earn their trust and confidence that I understood what was important to them. So for me, when I do this, there's 3 parts to a goal, okay? So the first one is a goal statement. This is pretty straightforward. Anybody who's done a stakeholder interview today has probably done this. Why are we doing this project? What are we trying to accomplish? Now, what you're gonna get from that is usually an answer like, we want to do A, B, and C. That's not bad, but it's just a statement, right? And in many cases, it can be kind of subjective. So the next thing that I do is I ask about success indicators. This is not measurements yet. This is simply saying, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Stakeholder, if we were to accomplish that goal, what sort of things are we going to see or hear or feel that would indicate we're doing a good job? This is super important for me and for us as researchers because this is talking specifically about behavior. What do we do research on? Behavior, right? And so now we actually have an idea what sort of things we're chasing after, what we can learn about more specifically to help sell them the right ideas on what their goal is. It's not subjective. We're saying, well, we learned about how to influence this behavior. And then finally, we ask about, well, how will you measure that? How will you measure those things, what you see, hear, feel, to know if you're doing a good job? The metrics part generally becomes pretty easy if you set it up in this way, right? Now, there's a reason why I set up all three, and we'll dive into that, but let's just go through an example. If you say, what are we trying to accomplish with the goal? You might hear something like, we want more people to sign up for a free trial. That's what this project is about. Okay, cool. So what are we going to see, hear, and feel if we're doing that? We'll probably see more people visiting the free trial page. We'll probably see more people actually filling out the form. You get the idea. It's behavior-based. And then all of a sudden, the metrics become easy. Page counts, unique views, actual form submissions, right? This is easy. The challenge comes in where today, oftentimes, we get the goal statement or the metrics. And that's tough, right? We don't always have a really good way to have these conversations because that goal statement can be very subjective, and the metrics can have no context. So that's why the success indicators for me are the most critical thing. As designers and researchers and product people, we design to support and or influence behavior, right? So we know exactly what to chase after, but then more importantly, we know what that goal means, and it's less interpreted, and it makes it more concrete. It also allows us to understand why these metrics are important. So for instance, page count or unique views. There's a whole lot of things I could probably recommend to increase those metrics that might not be useful for us at all and might not even be ethical, to be honest with you. But we'll see the metric move, so would we be successful? Well, of course not. So we can have behavior that we can wrap around that, right, to give it a little bit more context. Now, this is just one example. Keep in mind, you'll probably have more than one on any project that you've got. But I want to share a quote here as to why this is particularly useful and relevant to me. Jack Welsh, former CEO, very powerful and influential guy, former CEO of, somebody keep me honest, GE. Really well known for the writing and things that he did. But his quote, in terms of competitiveness, was the most successful companies, you need to learn about your customers faster than the competition, and then you basically need to turn that into action faster than they do. For us, I would argue, we need to learn more about our stakeholders faster than the competition, meaning the shiny object, the other idea that might not be right, whatever that might be, and then turn that into action before they can get latched onto another thing, right? So it's actually kind of simple. Learning about the people we work with and for, and actually building empathy for them. Think about this quote from Christina. This one kind of punched in the feels a little bit. She said, a lot of designers out there have no idea how their company makes money. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but ask yourself internally. Think about that. Do you know how your company actually makes money? Because if the answer is maybe or no, think of how that might look for your stakeholders and then listening to your recommendations. You start to see where this is going, right? We can empathize with them. So basically, when you're selling your ideas, forget the stereotypes. It's part of any successful process. Embrace it. You don't have to look like one of the people in the Google search. Our job is to understand our stakeholders, to know exactly what to sell them. Setting goals up in this way and why I advocate it and do it every single time, it allows people to make the connection between whatever you're recommending, the decision you're trying to share, and the desired outcome that they have. And that's what's missing today, the whole tappers and listeners thing, right? We don't know the song because it's in our head and they hear the words, but they can't make that connection. There's another video to illustrate some of this point. Wait a second. Before we get into this, this is Harrison Ford reference number 2. So for those of you following along, anybody here seen Indiana Jones, they know he's really afraid of snakes, right? So that's something to keep in mind for this video.
Ma!
Yeah.
Grab on! Grab!
I got it.
Come on, Mom! Pull, 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 pull! Pull! Grab on! Grab it.
Grab it, Indy.
It's a rat snake!
Rat snake?
Well, this one inside, it's not even poisonous! Now grab on!
Go get something else.
Like what?
Like a rope or something.
There's no Sears and Roebuck here. Grab the snake.
Maybe I can touch the bottom.
There is no bottom. Now grab it. Grab
I
it.
think I can feel it with my feet.
Grab the snake.
I'm calling it that.
It's a snake. What do you want me to call it?
Say rope.
What?
Say grab the rope.
Grab the rope. Hold tight. It's slimy.
Get rid of that thing, will you? Son?
I'm afraid of snakes. You're one crazy old man.
So why in the world would I show you that video about Indiana Jones being afraid of snakes? It is super relevant to us selling our ideas. We are Mutt, throwing the snake as recommendations like darts at people, and maybe that's not what they're calling it, right? The lesson here is that if your stakeholders don't like the way something's called, as much as we know it might not be the right thing, don't call it a snake, call it a rope. If they're afraid of user research, call it customer feedback. If they're afraid of customer feedback, call it outside intelligence. Whatever you've got to do to make them feel comfortable of the thing that you're doing will help benefit them. That gives us the opportunity to truly meet customer needs, right? So like, in this case, the reason it's relevant here in selling your ideas, let's not get caught up on language. And I know that we all like to do that often. So really, the lesson here for me, and I learned the hard way in several cases, speak the same language as your business. Sometimes it hurts to call things a different language, but maybe it's necessary. Let's take a step back, and let's assume that you try this out. I have to believe at least one person here is going, yeah, that's fine, Zach. If I do this, what happens when they still say no? It can happen, and it's happened to me, but let's take a look at our goal again. If they don't want to listen to our recommendations, what happens today? We throw our hands up and say they don't get it. We get frustrated. We did a lot of work, and it didn't land well. But if we've set up goals in this way, and this is actually really important for when people say no or you don't get the sale, is you have an opportunity to have a conversation. So if somebody says, I don't think we should redesign the sign-up form as part of this project, you can say, okay, that's fine. Do we have a better idea as to how we can elicit this kind of behavior to meet this goal? Right? Then it's not an opinion war. And it's not my recommendation versus yours. Or you have the opportunity to say, has this goal changed? So typically here, actually, interesting show of hands, is anybody here not interested in doing their best work? Literally not a single hand goes up, right? Why would that be true for business people, our stakeholders, our clients? They're not trying to be intentionally malicious by, taking a dump on our ideas. That's not what they want to do. It's just that we oftentimes haven't helped them make the connection. And bringing them back here in a language that they can understand that we formed together allows us to have a conversation when and if they don't get our ideas or recommendations. And by the way, I have been in situations where that's happened and we had a better conversation and a better recommendation than the one I gave because we were able to talk about it in a way we both understood. So what about selling user research? And I'm not talking about selling just your recommendations. We've talked about that at pretty good length. I'm talking about the situation in which somebody maybe doesn't value user research or they don't think we need to do it. Rachel talked about some of this earlier too, right? This is relevant story number 3, also a personal one. Joined this company. We were going to do some research. This was the director of director of technology for this app. And he came to me and said, how do we get research to prove what I think about this mobile app is right? And I said, that's not why we do research, right? Do you think this person was trying to be intentionally evil? No, of course not. What I did is I had a conversation with him about what we need to do is understand what questions we need answered or what we need to learn to influence this behavior. He wasn't trying to be malicious, but that was the only way he knew how to talk about it, right? So we came back to this and said, this is what we're trying to do. Do we have any information, data to help back us up and inform this today? The answer was no in this case, and so we did that. And I said, so we're not going to get answers, or we're not going to get data to back up your point of view. What we're going to do is get answers to these questions. And yeah, that's right. That's what we want. But it was a miscommunication, right? Anybody heard or read the book, How to Influence how to winfluence, how to influence people, win friends and influence people. Okay, a couple people. It's a pretty old book, but there's a really useful quote there. The author talks about how he loves strawberries and cream. But when he went fishing, he used that and it didn't catch any fish. But when he used crickets and worms, wouldn't you know, he got a lot of bites and eventually started catching fish. The same is true when we're trying to sell our ideas. We're not actually selling user research. We're selling answers to these questions. And in that scenario, right, that person didn't at all want to hear about the usability testing I thought we should do and benchmark the current app and then put it in front of prototypes and then see what the delta was, right? All the stuff that we do, he didn't care about that. He cared about answer to these questions. Because the reality is, we're not actually selling user research. We're selling confidence. And there isn't a single business person I've ever worked with who does not want to feel more confident and informed that they're doing the right things. I think there's a few people in this room that actually help you do that here today through user research. Okay, so selling any designs, features, product ideas. Let's talk about that. And this is relevant story number 4, personal story as well. I had worked on an extremely strategic initiative for this company. They were basically a project management type tool. And they tasked me, they were trying to grow into a new market with CMOs, right? So these are like top of the line business people, and they wanted to build a suite of features in their product to meet the needs of those people. So a lot of foundational research went into this, set up goals exactly the way that I was describing, came back with designs, and literally had research insights that backed up every single thing we recommended and why certain things were the way they were in the design. Brought this to the director of product strategy, and that person said, it's just not matching the movie I have playing in my head. So do you think that person was trying to be intentionally evil? Yes, he was an asshole. But what we were able to do is reel it back and talk about this and say, okay, are the ideas that we have not meeting this goal, or did the goal change? And guess what happened? The goal had changed, and the guy was an asshole. But we were able to have a more productive conversation because we were able to give recommendations that clearly show how it influences the behavior we all said is important, in this case from CMOs, and we had research to back up what that behavior and validated was. So another one from Dale Carnegie in that book is, he says, why talk about what we want? So think about it from researchers. Why talk about what we want to talk about research and why research is important? It's just absurd because we care about it, but nobody else does. And that's kind of the point, and that's okay. But talking about what they want will automatically make them interested in research because what you can do is help them get what they want through research. You just need to help them see that. So a winning design product feature recommendation, what does that look like? It is a combination of something the business wants, what our customers need, right squarely in the middle of that. What I usually tell people is that you learn something about your business and your customers. You learn, your business and your stakeholders, something about your customers, and it never goes like this, right? It's usually like this. And that part in the middle, if we can find that where it overlaps and make recommendations on that, we have an extremely much higher chance of success in building any product or service that we've got. Make sense? Nods are helpful. Okay, so really what I'm saying is a good recommendation, particularly out of research, to turn it into action, is some relevant customer insight with a business goal or the success indicator if you set them up the way I advocate, and then a recommendation that simply addresses both. That's really easy to say. But hopefully we've talked about ways you can set this up so that by the time they hear your recommendation, they trust you to know that you know what they are trying to accomplish with the business and the product itself, and you're just giving them information to help them do that. So really, I look at it kind of formulaic. It's the benefit they're going to get, plus the confidence they should do it, and the action that we're recommending. Make sense enough? And how these things line up is that's the business goal or success indicator. That's the benefit. You're going to be able to do this. Here's why, because of the work that we do in research. Here's the actual customer insight or insights that back this up. And then as a result, this is what I think we should do. So basically it becomes this equation that evens out in the end. Think about if you were just to come to this person and only provide the recommendation or the action. What do you look like? That guy, right? It's the same reason why you didn't want to believe me that I can get you home faster and easier, because you didn't trust me. There was no reason for you to trust me. So selling ideas, Mad Lib style, this is the exact way, and I'm not joking, the exact way I will say this in a meeting that I have found has the greatest chance of success. okay, I recommend we redesign the sign-up form, right? Your recommendation, your decision. Because we found these research insights, whatever they might be. This is going to help us see this behavior, influence this success indicator, which ultimately will allow us to meet this goal we all agreed on. We're using the same language we all agreed upon in the same way. One thing I just want to show you, so I mentioned Aurelius. When I talk about sharing a research insight, I'm not just giving the statement, I'm actually using this with all the supporting data, right? So this is just a screenshot of how I do that in Aurelius, but the insights along the top and then the supporting data that actually backs that up. So just as an idea of what I'm talking about, it's not just like a one little quick nugget. One more piece of advice that I want to give you when you're trying to sell these ideas and recommendations, create a clear separation between what and how. So what do I mean by that? When you say, I think we should redesign the sign-up form, get agreement, consensus, and alignment on that as the what before you start talking about the how. Reflect back on some conversations you've had where you've been having arguments maybe with somebody who actually isn't aligned with we should redesign the sign-up form, and you're talking about all the nuances of doing that before everybody's even on board with that being the thing, right? So creating a clear separation of here's what we recommend, only when we get understanding and agreement on that, then talk about how we should execute on that. Relevant story number 5 is called The Man in the Three Bricklayers, okay? So little boy is walking down the street, and he sees a bunch of masons off the side of the road, and he stops and talks to the first one and says, "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" The guy turns around and says, "What does it look like, kid? I'm laying bricks." So he keeps walking. He sees the next man. "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" The guy turns around. "What does it look like, kid? I'm building a wall." Okay. He keeps walking. He stops at the last one. He says, "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" The guy turns around and smiles, and he says, "I'm helping to build a beautiful new cathedral." This is a relevant story to this because I'm advocating that you sell cathedrals and not brick walls. We're not selling research. We're not selling insights. We're selling the story of the outcome. We have pieces to the puzzle that help with that. And that's what I advocate you doing. Thanks a lot. Wait a minute. Partridge in a pear tree. All right, that's it. Thank you. See you later, folks. Yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions, it looks like. Yeah, over here.
I'm just wondering if you can give us some more details when it comes to finding and sharing a common language, because I think many of us in the room have attempted that before, and
Sure.
sometimes people are very stubborn and only want to use their language, or if they come up with a different word, it's okay, but it's quite difficult sometimes to come to that shared language. So if you could expand upon when you've had difficulty, some nuggets of success.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of the examples I would use were actually from there. So the whole templates, you were not seeing the templates. Frankly, the word was dumb. It didn't represent what we were doing, but we just used it. So honestly, my advice in that particular case, if it's not directly hurting the case or any other work you're doing, I just lean into it. We're going to template it up, man. We're going to give you all the templates you can eat, right? Because it didn't really actually change the work that we were doing. Now, if the word they want to use or the language they want to use actually changes the nature of the work and the value that you ought to be providing, because you know that best, then it's a bit of an education process. The other thing I will mention is that, of course, I'm doing this with all the stakeholders involved. And what I do is I put that together and those goals and success indicators and metrics in that way, and then we have a meeting with the stakeholders together, and I say, this is what I heard from you. These are not my opinions. These are not my goals. This is what you all said we're trying to accomplish, and we get agreement on that before we ever do anything else, even research and other design. So hopefully what happens is you set that up in advance, again, before anybody ever hears your recommendation, and then you say, I'm just giving recommendations to help you do the thing you said is important. So again, make it about them. The final thing I will say, and this is a caveat to anything in life, there's going to be some people who just don't want to listen. And we're not here to solve that human condition. I hopefully want to provide strategies that you can use to remove 90% of them, right? The other 10%, that's just the world we live in sometimes. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Other questions? Right here, up front. It's really quiet in here.
I could have misheard you a little bit, but you kind of talked about the idea when you're discussing personas of accepting stereotypes.
Discussing personas and accepting stereotypes. I don't recall that part.
When you were, does anybody remember specifically about that, or salespeople personas? Kind of.
Oh yeah, no, I was saying forget the stereotypes. It's not, sales is not what you think.
Okay, no, I was
Yeah.
just curious. I misheard that part.
Okay, so you just needed clarification.
Yeah,
Got
because
it.
it kind of seemed we were glassing past it real quick. I was curious about that.
Oh, no. No, the point was actually that that's stereotypes that people have about like, oh, I'm not in sales, because that's what I certainly have. It's like, I'm not in sales. That's what, like, you know, people who do, they're trying to get you to do something. And that's actually not what it is at all. It's understanding people. And even interestingly, I've worked with some really excellent actual salespeople, not just people like us who are selling ideas. And the best salespeople are not that. The best salespeople are people who just understand humans and understand people's needs really well.
How did you kind of bridge that gap, I guess, is kind of where I was
Bridge the gap between like learning that and getting away
helping
from
those
the
people
stereotype.
get onto your getting onto your side in the sense of seeing themselves as salespeople.
Let me make sure I'm clear on your question. How have...
Sorry.
Ask it one more time. I just want to make sure I understand.
Well, because to a certain extent, you have to help people figure out that they are actually salespeople, right?
Sure.
So how do you bridge that gap with those people? Like,
Sure,
how are
sure.
you resolving
yeah,
that
with like other
conflict?
designers and researchers, for
Yeah,
instance.
how do you resolve that conflict?
I just illuminate those conversations, right? So typically, if there's a new team I join or anything like that, I'm completely silent in the number of first meetings, right? And I just kind of observe the interactions, and I usually point out to people like what you're doing there is you're actually just trying to sell your idea. You're trying to help them understand your point of view, but in order to do that well, you have to first understand their point of view, and that's what actually good sales is. So a lot of time, if anybody's actually ever felt like they were duped, like I didn't even want this thing, but this person convinced me that it's actually perfect for me, and they didn't seem like a salesperson at all, and you felt kind of T-boned, that's because they're awesome salespeople. They're not what you think that they are. They're just somebody who actually understood your needs really, really well and said, well, I have something that will really help you there. And you're like, yeah, I want that. And then you're putty in their hands, right? And that's why I started with the caveat, like this kind of work you can use for a nefarious purpose. You can be seedy. You can try to influence people in the wrong ways, and so hopefully you won't use that. Other questions? Yes.
I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about how it can be upsetting at first when stakeholders don't necessarily agree or adopt our vision for a problem,
Sure.
or a solve for the problem. And I was just thinking, like I think the nature of UX design is that we're one thing is like fail often, fail early. And so we're sort of trained to like take risks and sort of challenge the situation. And, there's also the side that we're not always right in our assumptions and presumptions about the way to move forward. And so I was actually kind of thinking, in a way, it's like a form of validation that they challenge us. It's a good thing that they're challenging us, because then it forces us to sort of take a step back and assess whether we're taking the right steps to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any like specific things like where you've stepped back and
Yeah.
said like, wait, maybe I'm not right on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The healthy tension is actually necessary, and that's part of the reason why this is so important for me, because either way is actually going to be wrong in some respect, right? So if we only meet customer needs, it's probably not going to be good for the business. Right. And then we're out of a job. But if we only meet business needs, well, we've all experienced something like that, right? Then the product sucks, and it's not what we want at all, and it's a money pit, and it's not valuable, whatever the case may be. That healthy balance is actually very, very useful. Doing this for me just helps close the gap. So we're not arguing about the wrong things, right? We're arguing about what's the best way to address this together, as opposed to what's the right thing to address. That's a much broader and a lot harder conversation to navigate. If we at least have a shared language to have that conversation, we can be more productive. Yeah. So to summarize, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, thank you for this really engaging talk, Zach.
Thank you for being here.
I wanted to ask a bit around the context for effectively selling your idea. And
Yeah.
so, certain things that I take into consideration, like should I integrate the process of selling an idea sort of into an existing like meeting or process that's already scheduled, or should I set something aside? Should I try to set something up in an email or materials beforehand or afterwards? Should I be the one selling this idea, or should someone else on my team be doing it? And who on the other side should I be talking to get that idea at the right level of influence? And I'm wondering if you have any ideas or like design considerations you do for that process?
Yes. There's a lot there. I'll touch on as many of them as I can. So who should be doing this? I mean, I always strongly advocate for the people doing the work should be doing this, right? Now, one of the things that I didn't actually touch on in the talk, which is a really useful point here, is if you set up goals in this way, a lot of us tend to work on stuff that goes like several months, right? It's not usually a churn and burn, month in and out kind of thing. And what happens after 6, 8, 12 months working on something? People start to lose sight of why we're doing what we're doing. We can come back to this, and it's not you just reminding them of what you thought. It's reminding them of why we're all here. You get into the details of everyday design decisions and recommendations, right? So it's a useful thing to kind of pull out. Recommendation I have in terms of who should deliver it and how, I think is going to largely depend on your process and what the project is and probably even the culture of your company. But that said, I tend to be pretty methodical about it. I stole this from a guy named Peter Merholtz, some of you probably heard. He said, I take a very lawyer-like approach to design. So basically what I try to do is I make the case as to why everything I'm saying is fact or truth, which is very relative, of course, so that we don't have to spend time doing that. And then in that way, I'm setting up, here's the meetings where I'm talking with stakeholders. Here's the meetings where we're going to talk about and agree to this. Here's the meeting where we've done the research, we're coming back, and we're agreeing these recommendations are right, between the what and how. That's what I was referring to there. So I personally, it's my style, and I think this is, adapted as to what makes most sense for you, but my style is to be very methodical, personally. Hopefully that's helpful. Cool.
This is a very specific question. So I don't know if you have been in this situation and how you handle it. So you are in a war zone, and in a meeting, one side is UX team, one side is business team. So they are arguing something, and they look at you, say, you are the researcher, you have the results.
Sure.
And you can't hurt both sides. You can't. So when you sell your recommendation, like, how do you handle this situation? It won't hurt both of them.
Yeah, cool. Good question. I like that a lot. Can I just clarify? Did you say war zone or war room?
War room.
Okay, because if it was war zone, that would have been pretty awesome. But I was like, I've never been in that, but I kind of want to experience that now. So again, I'm going to keep beating the same drum with the whole set the goals up in this way. I'm not here to be prescriptive for you, but I want to share this because if you do, then it's not you making the recommendation. What you're doing, you're the liaison to say, here's what we learned, and here's what we said was important. So let's have a conversation. Are we doing the things that are going to best help us influence the behavior and that support what we learn from customers? Right? Then you get to actually be, because you said you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings on either side, and I think that's totally fair. You don't want to be the one that has to make a call and say somebody's right or somebody's wrong. And then what this does is it removes that stigma entirely. It says there's not right or wrong, there's only accurate or inaccurate. We all said that we were trying to do this, and this is what we learned from customers. So assuming all of that's true, are we doing the right things? And you get to actually bring the group into that. Let's discuss that rather than just have somebody say the final word and then somebody's walking away with a frown on their face, right? So that would be my recommendation. Over here. Hey, there was a question. No, I'm kidding. Thank you very much.
No, I have one last question. Sorry.
Well, we do have one.
Yeah, surrounding design ethics. Have you ever experienced a story or a stakeholder who challenged your morals or ethics of designing something that you don't really feel comfortable with?
Yeah, totally.
How did you deal with that?
Whew, okay. I can think of one situation where I had a pretty pointed and direct conversation in a relatively public forum and told that person that that was not my job and that was not what I was here to do. But that is my personality. So I don't think that approach works with everybody. Sometimes what I've done, particularly when they've been team members, so not a stakeholder or a leader, I've brought somebody aside and just kind of said, some things you were talking about there gave me pause. I want to understand, again, I tried to empathize first. I want to understand where that was coming from for you so that I can understand why you might have said that or hopefully maybe I misinterpreted, whatever that might be, once establishing that kind of level of understanding, then I share why that was. Maybe I misunderstood, and that's happened, because I'm only human too, but then there have been situations where it's not, and I say, I want to share now why that's not how we're going to get down, right? But then I'll do that in a private setting, but it's usually to understand them first, because there's a lot of people who say a lot of things, and sometimes it's not what they mean. Try to give them the benefit of the doubt. It can be challenging. It's definitely a challenging part of our work, especially we are trying to serve humans by understanding humans. There's a lot that goes into that, right? So that's what I would do.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.